Contracts can be one of the most complicated and frustrating things in the sport. These negotiations can lead to many things: overpayments, holdouts that last into the next season, or the occasional steal of a player who performs way above their pay grade. These are the kind of things that fans of all teams can relate to, and some have more gruesome memories of bad deals than others, but I think everyone can agree that there is at least one contract on your favorite team that you wish was a little less, or at least not as long. Hey, it's Matt from Puck Rivals, and today I'm going to be going over the worst contracts on every team. This video will feature all the Western Conference teams, and we will later be releasing one for the Eastern Conference teams as well. Also, I have to say before starting this video that we did not consider players who are on LTIR with no chance of returning or buyout paid players to be eligible for this. Leave a comment on who you think has the worst contract on your favorite team, and with that, let's get right into the video. The Ducks are a very interesting team when it comes to their contract situation. They do have some pretty expensive deals for older players, but a lot of them are closer to expiry. So we decided to go with veteran center Ryan Kesler as their worst contract. Kesler is set to make just under $7 million for another 2 years, and missed the entire 2019-2020 season after undergoing major hip surgery. He has slowed down a ton from what he once was as a player, putting up 8 points in 60 games in 2018-2019. Kesler is about to turn 36, and it is very likely he won't be able to perform close to a player worth $7 million. He's on LTIR right now at least, but after recovering from that surgery and then trying to play out the rest of that contract, if he's able to do that, the Ducks are going to have a tough time dealing with that heavy cap hit on a non-effective player. And now onto the Coyotes. Okay, I know we're definitely going to take some heat for this pick, but to be honest, this one was pretty tough because the Coyotes have a roster full of players being paid pretty accurately based on their value. And this is the main reason why we feel that Clayton Keller has the team's worst contract. Next season will be the start of his 8-year deal worth just over $7 million, but he isn't currently meeting the value of a player worth that amount of money. The Coyotes bet on the future of Keller, and the likelihood that the 22-year-old will be worth more than that during the later years of his deal is likely the case. But right now it's looking like an overpayment for a player who has struggled since his great rookie season that saw him get 65 points in 82 games. From that time, he finished with 47 and 44 points on a team that struggles to score. And maybe if the whole team gets rolling at some point, then maybe that'll get his numbers up. But at the same time, you're also expecting a guy that you're paying over $7 million to do that himself. Overall, we don't think this is a bad contract, but it is definitely the worst on the Coyotes due to the lack of results in the past 2 seasons. For the Flames, this one's a no-brainer. It's Milan Lucic, the guy they traded James Neal for. And even with the awful first year Neal had with the Flames, I still wouldn't have traded him for Lucic, no chance. In the summer of 2016, Peter Chiarelli signed Lucic to a 7-year, $42 million contract, paying him $6 million per season. He was already at the beginning of his contract, but quickly lost his value over the past few years, and adds nothing more than a slower physical presence in the bottom 6. He's definitely not someone you should be paying $5.25 million for. Yeah, Edmonton retained $750,000 of his contract because they knew they were getting way more value from Neal, and they were definitely right. He put away 20 points this season for Calgary, and at 32, it's very unlikely Calgary can expect more than that from Lucic over his final 3 years of his deal. They shouldn't have traded Neal, man. Now on to Chicago. For the Hawks, it's another easy one. We went with defenseman Brent Seabrook. In 2015, Seabrook signed an 8-year deal with the Hawks for just under $7 million per year. And this move was just part of them trying to keep guys who won the Stanley Cup for their team. 3 times. This deal is more of a payday because of what he did in the past, because being in the middle of this contract already, it's very clear that Seabrook's best days are behind him. In an injury-shortened season, he put up a measly 4 points in 32 games. And even so, Seabrook isn't really a points guy anyway, but the 35-year-old has struggled to keep up in a league that continues to grow faster around him. Adding on to the fact that he's 35 and having 4 years left of a cap hit that is more than David Pastrnak isn't great for the Hawks. But at the end of the day, it happened because of the great things he did for the team. Those 3 great things. So he's had a solid career. But man, does this contract stink for the Hawks when it comes to current value. But if it gets brought up, Hawks fans can always just use the Patrick Waugh quote.
I can't really hear what Jeremy says because I got my 2 Stanley Cup rings plugged in my ear.
Now looking at the Avs, this was a very tough decision. They have all of their stars on really team-friendly deals, especially McCarr still making entry-level money. Because of this, we ended up going with Erik Johnson as Colorado's worst contract. Johnson is halfway through his 7-year, $42 million contract that he signed with the Avs in 2015. He's been a staple on that team's blue line for years, and an effective top 4 shutdown defenseman. This selection for him doesn't mean his contract is bad at all. Even as a 32-year-old, he's provided great value and guidance for the team. Colorado just has such a great level of contracts across the board that Johnson's $6 million over the next 3 seasons is the team's worst deal, which is nothing to turn your nose at. With the Stars, we had to go with recent free agent signing Joe Pavelski as the team's worst contract. Pavelski never got comfortable in Dallas this season, which led to him putting up 31 points in 67 games and tying a career-worst 14 goals. He was definitely a huge letdown for a team that was counting on him to help with the secondary scoring, and that's why they offered him $7 million over 3 years when he signed his deal. With 2 more years left on his contract, the Stars definitely hope they can get the 36-year-old Pavelski back at least close to his 30-goal self when he was lighting it up with the Sharks in the past. But with 14 goals this year and getting paid $7 million, his contract is the worst on this Dallas Stars team. Now with Edmonton, it was easy. They were paying a guy $12.5 million a year, and no question that was way too much to pay anybody on your team. Totally kidding, he's McJesus and he's worth every penny of that contract. Please don't crucify me, Oilers fans. With Edmonton, it's actually tough to make this decision because after dealing Lucic, they really don't have anyone on their team who's vastly overpaid anymore. But with that being said, we actually chose the guy who was traded to Edmonton in the Lucic deal as the team's worst contract. So it's James Neal. And I know by doing this, I kind of contradict myself because earlier I said how worth it was that the Oilers traded Neal for Lucic, and I still agree with that statement. James Neal is 2 years into a 5-year deal that has him making $5.75 million per year. The 32-year-old put up a modest 31 points and 19 goals this year, which is a huge improvement from his 19 points in Calgary this season prior. If Neal can continue to consistently put up 20 plus goals in his final years of his contract, then it's really not that bad. But paying close to $6 million for a one-dimensional player who's out of his prime is why we have James Neal as Edmonton's worst contract, but still a ton better than if they still had Lucic. So I'm all on board with that. After looking at the rebuilding LA Kings, there were a few candidates for worst contract. Mainly the key candidates were the guys that led them to 2 Stanley Cup championships. Even though they're the ones that are paid a lot more, we felt that Kopitar and Doughty both provide a lot of value still, and focus more on the struggling goaltender Jonathan Quick. Quick is set to make $5.8 million over the next 3 seasons, and the 34-year-old is at the tail end of a 10-year contract that he signed in 2012. That's a lot of money for a goalie who had very disappointing seasons over the past 2 years. Yes, the team hasn't been great, but with a guy you're giving that much money to, you would expect better than a .888 or a .904 save percentage over the last 2 seasons. It's Quick's lack of recent results and importance of the position for why we think this contract is the worst for the Kings. He has time to bounce back with 3 years left on his deal, but he's already 34 and he'll have a lot of work to do to get anywhere near where he used to be. Minnesota has a few questionable deals where they have overpaid older players on their roster, but there are an easy 2 that come to mind, and they were signed at the same time: Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. These 2 have been grouped together since they signed their identical 13-year deals back in 2012, and we feel that Suter still provides a lot more value than Parise, which is why we have him as the team's worst contract. The Wild do have a lot of older players at high cap hits, which will likely continue to cause them to struggle as the years move forward, but they are all currently still providing a lot of value for the team, and this also includes Parise. The problem is, he's 36, and is getting paid $7.5 million for another 5 years, until he's 41. He's put up pretty good numbers over the past 2 years, and currently is an effective player for the Wild. But with his injury history and the age factor to go along with it, this deal is going to continue to look worse and worse. Looking at the Nashville Predators, it was an easy decision that Kyle Turris is the team's worst contract. Turris is locked down for another 4 years at $6 million per year, and that is a significant overpayment for a guy that's slotted as their third-line center, especially when you consider that they're paying their top 2 guys, Duchesne and Johansson, at $8 million apiece. Turris put up 9 goals and 31 points this season, and at 30 that's likely going to be the consistent numbers that he will put up year over year for the rest of his deal. For a team like Nashville who's very close to the cap, this contract really sucks for them. And with the cap not going up for 3 years, it's only going to make things worse. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Preds try and package him with other pieces to try and get Seattle to take his bad contract during the expansion draft. We'll just have to wait and see. Now the Sharks have a few different deals that aren't that great, or won't be that great in the future. But we ended up choosing 32-year-old defenseman Marc-Edouard Vlasic as the team's worst contract. Vlasic is set to make $7 million for another 6 years. and this season he put up a low 15 points over 70 games. His best days of being an effective shutdown D-man are behind him, and now the Sharks are stuck with this terrible contract, while they're also paying $19.5 million between Karlsson and Burns. That's an expensive blue line, and doesn't give them much wiggle room with the other 3 D-men, as every other defenseman besides those 3 are making under $1 million. With Vlasic's effectiveness as an all-time low, it's unlikely they'll be able to move him on that deal, and now to face the consequences for giving him that kind of money. The bad contract for the St. Louis Blues is from the guy whose deal is set to begin next year, defenseman Justin Falk. Falk was acquired from Carolina this season and instantly signed with the Blues for 7 years at $6.5 million per year. Some of this came as a surprise because Alex Pietrangelo is set to become a UFA this season, and signing Falk for that money in term was going to make it difficult for them to keep him. And now with the flat cap, it looks even less likely. Falk put up a career-low 16 points in 69 games this season, after adjusting for the 2012-2013 lockout season. The D-man struggled in his first year with the Blues, and now that he's locked down for the next 7 years, they'll hope the 28-year-old can find his game again and be an effective piece for the Blues' blue line. But right now, that isn't the case, and considering how ineffective he was this season, and going into a $2.5 million raise, this was an easy call for the team's worst contract. The Canucks are a team who have recently been giving bottom 6 players more term and money than expected during free agency over recent years. You have Brandon Sutter, Jay Beagle, and Antoine Roussel to name a few. But there is one signing in particular that has been haunting the Canucks since the moment the pen hit the paper, and that's winger Louis Eriksson. Eriksson signed with the Canucks in 2016 for 6 years, making $6 million per year, after coming off a great year with the Bruins where he scored 30 goals and 63 points. But sadly for the Canucks, this would prove to be Eriksson's last effective season, as he hasn't even been able to put up 30 points in a year with the Canucks, let alone 30 goals. This season he put up 13 points in 49 games, and the 35-year-old continues to decline in a bottom 6 role with Vancouver with 2 years left on his deal. The worst part about this is, he's tied for the most expensive contract on the team, and that's not something you want for someone who barely produces for your group. Eriksson is by far the worst contract on this team. No question. Now moving on to the Golden Knights. This was a tough one because they really don't have any very bad contracts on their books. All of their players provide pretty good value for their cap hit, but based on how the season went, we chose Marc-Andre Fleury as the team's worst contract. Fleury didn't have the greatest of years numbers-wise, posting a .905 save percentage over 49 games, something you don't really like to see from your starter who's making $7 million for another 2 years. He's been the face of the franchise since they drafted him back in 2017, but has unfortunately dealt with injuries and inconsistency over his career. Fleury is a great goaltender who has the ability to carry a team through the playoffs and has shown that he can. But after Vegas traded for Robin Lehner, you have to believe that they don't have complete confidence in him at this point. Again, we only picked Fleury because he has the worst contract on this team, but we still feel he is not far off from that value. Now for the Jets' worst contract, we have their second line center, Brian Little. Little is set to make slightly over $5 million over the next 4 seasons. He put up 5 points in the 7 games he played this season, but missed the first 9 games from a concussion, and shortly after returning was struck in the head by Nikolai Ehlers' slap shot, causing him to miss the remainder of the season. Picking Little for worst contract does not by any means have to do with his skill, because when he's healthy he is a very effective piece of the Jets' top 6. It's his bad luck with injuries that makes him the worst contract on the team, which is in no part his fault. But with his cap hit over $5 million, and then just having to have that ability to make room for his contract when he comes back in the lineup after recovering from an injury, it's not the easiest feat for a team like that who is so close to the cap. It's also definitely worth the hassle for a player like Little, but with another 4 years to go on his deal and the significance of his perforated eardrum that caused him to miss the season, it'll be interesting to see how he can come back from this. But we do wish him all the best though, and hope he can come back as soon as possible. Making these decisions was very hard at times, either because there weren't really any obvious awful deals, or there were too many to choose from. But honestly, it's a little comforting to know that all teams deal with this problem. So as a fan, you aren't suffering just with your team. We're all frustrated together. Be sure to leave a comment if you agree with our picks, or if there's someone else on our team who deserves to get chosen as the worst contract instead. And make sure to stay tuned for when we release the Eastern Conference edition of this series. But that wraps it up for this video. This is Matt from Puck Rivals, and I'll see you guys next time.